Welcome to Midlife Matters. I'm Marie, and each week I'm joined by my friends Julie and Mindy to talk about all the topics keeping women in the middle years up at night. Today we're talking about listening. This sounds like such a simple concept, but there are so many pitfalls to avoid, and when we really look at ourselves, we see that we often have trouble truly listening to someone else. Join us as we share our mistakes and explore how we can improve for future conversations. Listeners, today we're going to talk about listening. Seems like such a simple concept, and we all think we know how to do it, but if the current cultural climate shows us anything, it shows us that we don't really know how to listen. And as a springboard for this discussion, we're using a chapter from Jordan Peterson's book, 12 Rules for Life. If you've heard of this book or even read it yourself, you may be interested in going back to episode 138, where we talked about another one of his rules. Rule number 4. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. And Julie and Mindy, that was a really great discussion, and I really highly recommend that if listeners have not heard that, they go back. But today we're looking at rule number 9. So assume the person you're listening to might know something you don't. And that seems so obvious to us, Julie and Mindy, but do you find it hard to put into practice?
Well, yeah, and it seems like it's a lost art these days. Like, I don't feel like you said, the cultural climate, there's not a whole lot of listening going on, but I am trying to do it on a personal level.
Yeah, I feel like I'd have to be really intentional. Like I have to tell myself, remind myself, you don't know everything, Mindy, because I think when information comes in, we automatically relate it to our own personal experiences. So it's really easy to just make everything about what you know.
Right.
Yeah. Even when we ask a question, a lot of times we already know what we want the other person to say or what they think they should say, or, we've already have an answer in mind. It's not even like we're really truly looking for information sometimes. So
right. And that comes out because you notice, like, we know the right people to ask even.
True.
We know we're going to ask the people that are going to give us the answers we want.
It's true. And you can tell when someone else is doing the same thing to you if they ask you a question and then they're not really paying attention to the answer. I'm like, oh, you really didn't want to know.
Well, Jordan starts out this chapter saying that listening is not giving advice. He says advice is what you get when the person you're talking to wants to revel in the superiority of their own intellect. Ooh, that seems harsh. Or it's what you get when the person you're talking with about something horrible and complicated wishes you would just shut up and go away. Boy, I don't know that I feel like I give those two impressions, reveling in my own intellect or wishing that people would shut up and go away. But if I'm honest, there probably have been instances where I have given off these vibes. What about you guys?
Well, I think maybe because they do sound really harsh, that maybe that's not the intent. He's not saying that's your intent, but maybe that's how you come across. Like Mindy said, everything's kind of you're filtering it through your own experience. So you're like, oh, I know all about this and I can help you with this. But the person asking the question may have a totally different experience and not need the advice that helped you,
Right. Right. Well, I do feel like, I don't know, I feel like that's really harsh, and maybe I'll question it here because my first question, well, what is his definition of the word advice? Because I do feel like sometimes people do genuinely ask you for things, they want to know. So I would hate to feel like every single time, you were having a conversation like that it was in the negative context.
Yeah. I think as we go on, you'll see, Mindy, that he's talking about like truly listening. If you truly listen to someone, he says they'll tell you everything you need to know. Like they will give you more information if you're the right kind of listener.
Ooh, I like it. Okay.
So,
well, I know that I love it when someone asks me for advice. Like, don't we all just feel so honored that somebody would want our opinion? And I love to ask other people for advice. I've said many times on this podcast that I gather a lot of information before I make a decision. And polling people for their advice is one of the ways I do this. And I probably have people listening right now that can think of times that I've asked them for advice and then done the complete opposite. Probably because I polled 10 other people and picked out a consensus of what I liked best. But I really did hear each person. But I'm thinking that maybe from the other person's perspective, it might seem like I haven't followed their advice or that they wasted their time in giving it. But I don't know how I can really avoid that because that's just the kind of person I am when I make a decision. Maybe I can say, like, I don't know if I'm going to actually follow your advice, but what would you do?
Yeah, don't be hurt, but I'm really just
purely
asking
hypothetical. You. Just what would you do?
Right, right. But I notice that I am more leery of giving advice as I grow older and more mature. Like the longer I live, I realize there are so many personal factors that go into making a decision. And even though someone says they're giving you all the facts, they can't. They're either intentionally withholding or they're withholding because they don't even realize they're withholding some crucial piece of information that might change your opinion or your direction. And so it's really, really hard to genuinely put ourselves in someone else's shoes. So do you guys find that? Do you find that the older you get, the harder it is to even give advice?
Definitely. Yeah, because you when you're younger, I think you have things figured out and you have a lot of preconceived notions about how the way things ought to work. And you just realize that's not the real world. And there's lots of different options and reasons for things happening. And so, yeah, I just tend to sit back and listen more. And often I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say for advice. And sometimes it's just like, I'm here to listen, but I can't promise you that I'm going to be able to tell you what to do. You know, so that's that has to be your decision.
I know when I was younger, things were definitely more black and white. And honestly, I think the only change in my own behavior is that I keep coming face to face with my own sin, my own problems, my own failings. And every time I see that in myself, it helps me to be more compassionate towards other people. Because then I think the guy cutting me off on the road that's, flicking me off in the car and driving crazy, instead of just thinking he's a terrible person and a bad driver, I think he might be going to the hospital. He might be, he might have a sick kid in the car. It's just like I think, realize that things aren't just black and white. People have so many different experiences. So the more you come face to face with your own personal failings, but also reading and taking in more information around the world and talking to people, you realize everybody's going through stuff right now. And so it does affect behavior.
Right. And if we could truly know why someone made the decision they did, we might find that we would have made the same decision given their set of circumstances. Even though when we look at it from the outside, we say, oh, I would never choose to do that.
I would never do that.
Yeah. And, like you said, Mindy, that person may have just moved to a new town or their husband might have cancer or you just don't know. Yeah. And people just aren't just the sum of that one behavior or their sin or whatever you're seeing. That's not their whole identity.
Right.
That's one aspect of it that any of us are capable of at a given moment.
Right. Well, one of the things that Jordan moves on to say is, and I thought this was helpful since it really is hard to give advice that people can genuinely for sure follow. And it's hard to even take advice sometimes. The next part of his chapter was really relatable to me because he says that talking is how people think. And saying things out loud helps us to organize our thoughts and allows us to come to conclusions that we might not otherwise recognize. As we talk out a plan of action, we simulate the world and plan how to act in it. And he uses the example of a kid who says, "Wouldn't it be fun to climb up on the roof?" And his sister says, "That's stupid. What if you fall off? What if Dad catches you?" And the brother can then modify his original simulation, draw the appropriate conclusion, and hopefully let the whole idea wither on the vine or not. Maybe he decides to take the risk. But either way, in his mind, through talking about it with his sister, he's played out a couple different scenarios. And I'm a verbal processor, so I might start out saying things that are contradictory or impossible or not practical. But if I'm talking to a good listener, I will calm down as I talk. I'll realize the errors in my thinking. I might change my mind from where I even started. It's just kind of getting the thoughts out and bouncing them off a good listener that helps me sometimes even just come up with my own, in quotes, advice. I figure it out as I talk.
Yeah, just when you're talking to someone who's listening, you're also listening to yourself. So you hear things like, wow, when you hear it out loud, it's like, oh, that doesn't make sense, or that's not right, what I really believe. Or, sometimes you come to you get your own answers,
Right.
by talking out loud. But one of the things that I like to back up just a little bit, he said, that thinking involves listening to yourself. So a lot of people can have these conversations in their head. Like, I think he says they kind of create avatars where you see, like side A says this, and then, you counter it with, well, but no, that's not a good idea. Like all this conversation is just going on between your own ears. And he said you have to be willing to disagree and to compromise and change your mind. And he said most people are not very good at that, and that's why they need to talk. Are you guys good at that? Because I am not. He said most thinking that we call thinking is really just like self-criticism. And I think that's kind of what I do. I just think, gosh, Julie, why'd you do that? But I never can really think through the other options myself in my head.
Yeah. No, I'm the same way. And it definitely, if you're talking with a good listener, I think that sometimes instead of just talking or responding, they ask good questions. And so if that's one of the things I've learned is I wish I could ask myself those questions.
Right. Like, that's what I mean. Like I can't do that.
How do you know how to get there? And so I know that we did a podcast on that, how we take in information and things like that. And Julie and I both were internal processors. And Marie was the external. And so, I do have a harder time. Also, I have a harder time talking through it. Like, I don't even know where to start. So
I guess we don't need to be internal processors if we
I know.
feel like we're good at that.
Yeah. Well, another thing we do internally, we do self-criticism, but I also do a lot of self-justification. Like, oh, it's okay. This decision is right in this situation for me because of X, Y, or Z. But if I really said that out loud to someone else, they would call me on the hypocrisy of my thinking or the flawed way that I'm looking at it. That's why saying it out loud, or even if they don't call me on it, if I even just say it out loud, I hear it for myself.
No, you're so right, Marie. And that's a really good point, because when we're interacting with others, like, would you give your kids the same excuse essentially for their behavior? No.
Right.
But anytime we look at ourselves, you're like, oh, I have all the reasons in the world why I'm doing what I'm doing. Yeah. But we don't necessarily have the same grace with others.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're usually not ever willing to make the opposing argument very strong. No. It's usually easy to.
We have really good reasons.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and speaking of kids, I was thinking about how if a friend says something wacky and off the wall, I might be able to talk it through. And, even if they choose the wackier off the wall thing, it's not really affecting me, probably. But how many times do our teenagers or our kids come to us and say something and we don't even want to talk it through? We're just like thinking, oh my goodness, they said this, so they're definitely going to do it. They're going to be dead by the side of the road, in jail, ruin their life, whatever. When really they just might be verbally processing something.
True.
Watching their reaction.
Yes, they watch our reaction. And anyways, it just kind of reminded me that this is true when we are in conversations with family members also.
Yeah.
That kind of leads into his next point. He talks about a listener is a collaborator and an opponent. And he says listeners test your talking. And one of their ways they test it is by their reactions, their facial expressions. So like you said, Mindy, a lot of times they may want to see, how does what I'm about to say affect her? What's her initial response? And he says that the listener stands for the crowd. Like, not that the crowd is always right, but a lot of times they are. And he said, if you are going to insist on bending the world to your way, you better have your reasons and you better have thought them through. And I thought that was really good. Like, there are times when you need to stand up and stand against the crowd, but that should be a good indicator. And if you're going to oppose the crowd, then what are your reasons? I thought that was really good advice.
Yeah, I thought that was good advice too. It was hard advice to hear because I think a lot of times we really do feel like we have good reasons. And also, if you are a Christian in a secular world, you're going to find yourself coming up against the crowd more often than you're non-Christian. And so you do have to be sort of used to going against the crowd and thinking against the crowd. So now you have to kind of think, is this a good time to go against the crowd or not?
Right. Do I really
I guess
know
I was
what
thinking
believe?
on things that weren't moral issues.
Oh,
It could just be a way to decorate your house or where to go on. But, it could be non-moral decisions that you're making that veer from public opinion or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, I guess if public opinion is telling you not to paint your house purple and you just really, really want to paint your house purple, maybe take a week or two and poll your neighbors.
I know one decision that Bryce and I made that I felt like went against the norm was just having 4 children. Like, I don't know if you guys felt that way, but you can gauge how people see you by their comments. And boy, did we get a lot of comments with number 3. And then number 4, I'm like, oh my goodness, people are not for this. Like people are like, oh, you guys are overwhelmed, must have your hands full. And like,
or don't you know how
that
this
happens? You know how that happens, don't you? And you're like, okay, I can tell this is not a popular decision.
Yeah.
One thing I would say is I think those comments come around. Because now things I hear are, oh, you're so fortunate to have a big family. Or, oh, you're so lucky that the X, Y, or Z. Like, it's really, really hard in the baby little kid years, but there is a payoff later. And so maybe if you're a listener kind of getting a lot of those comments, or you're trying to think of, should I have more kids, but I don't want to deal with those comments, they do come around. You think those comments will be forever. And they're really not.
They're not. No, it's funny when your kids are older, the comments that we get, especially if we're all together, is, wow, what a beautiful family. Oh, you guys are so blessed. And I'm like, you're right, Marie. It's really come around. But I mean, you almost have to be a little bit of a rebel for the things that you truly believe in. You almost have to have, that, like you guys said, you have to know why and remember why when you get comments.
Right. Well, let's think about whether we are good listeners, because Jordan Peterson basically has said that we're pretty poor self-analyzers. We're pretty poor at recognizing our own downfalls. But if we were just going to answer this question, if someone had come up to you before you read this chapter and said, are you a good listener? What would you have said?
I would say, I hope so.
I think before I read this chapter, I would have said, I don't know. I doubt that I'm a good listener because I don't know what to say. I don't know what advice to give. But I think now, after reading the chapter, that's not the most important part. It's letting someone talk and get it all out. And then helping them sift through that, like what their own words.
Right.
I don't have to add that much.
Right. I would have said I was a pretty good listener because I like to ask questions and I am interested in the why of different choices that people make and why they're thinking about doing that. And I really genuinely want to know. But after reading this chapter, I see that I have a lot of room for improvement. I think if we read this chapter and don't think we have room for improvement, then we're really bad at self-analyzation.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, some of the pitfalls that Jordan talks about in our listening are what he calls the conversational variants. And we've all experienced these. So one of the kind of conversations that people get into that is not a good form of listening is one-upmanship. And one person is trying to establish that they're better than someone else. And we've all experienced this. And we've probably all done it, if we're honest. Have you guys, do you have anything to share about one-upmanship that struck you as you thought about it?
That was something that it's very apparent. And I know that Bryce and I we try to hold each other accountable to that in a kind way. Because it's so easy to fall into that. It's, it's a competitive type of conversation and you want to leave a conversation feeling better about yourself. But again, one of the things that I've had to intentionally tell myself is when I have a conversation with somebody, my purpose is to let them feel better after the conversation, not me. And it is an active thing that I have to think of, though, because it's so easy to get involved in that because it's fun. You're like, oh, that happened to you. Oh, this happened to me. And oh, that happened to you. Oh, this happened to me, And so at some point you're like, wait a minute, where's this going?
Right. And Mindy, I wasn't even thinking about the one-upmanship between spouses, but how many conversations have we all had where I had a hard day. Oh, I did too. I did X, Y. Well, I did X, Y, and Z. And we're always trying to one up how much work the other person put into family life or work life or whatever that day.
I did so much more than you did today, or mine was so much harder.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about that between spouses, but it's true.
Well, and I didn't even mean that like between us. But that's true. That happens too. But I actually meant like when we're in a conversation, like with another couple, or if we're out in a group setting and we see each other, like that's happening with the other person, we kind of look at each other and it's like, we both know we have kind of a cue almost because we're like, oh, hang on, I'm talking too much in this conversation. Let me back off,
Yeah. Another pitfall that people fall into is that neither one is really listening because they're both biding their time thinking about what they're going to say next. Oh, I'm guilty of this. I'll just raise my hand.
Yeah. And it's not like I'm anxious to say it. It's just I'm thinking, oh, gosh, what should I say to that? And then I've missed the next next few crucial words. And he said a lot of times, when people are doing that because they say something that totally doesn't make sense.
Or that you just said. You could have just said it, but they didn't even listen. Yeah, that's an easy one to fall into. And I think we recognize it when someone else is doing it to us, but we think we're so subtle.
That's true. I can see that in other people easily.
Yeah. All right. Well, how about the one that is so common in today's cultural climate where one person is trying to prove he or she is right, usually around politics or economics, and the speaker uses ridicule or selective evidence and believes winning the argument makes him right. Now, I will just say that I love these kind of conversations. Just because I think it's kind of fun to really hash something out, but I am totally guilty of using sarcasm or only picking out the information that I'll freely admit that. I think we sort of expect that in an argument, but I also need to recognize that it's a pitfall.
Right. Like, what's your purpose?
I hate those kind of conversations. And it was very convicting after reading this, that when we belittle or ridicule or kind of oversimplify the opponent's point, that you're really not gaining any ground. And I loved what he said that, if you actually listen and are willing to maybe see their point of view, he said it takes a lot of courage to be a listener because you might actually change your mind, and people don't want to do that. So you might, get some new insight and tweak your point of view some, or even come around to understanding theirs, or it really could just shore up your own position even more. And they're both good things. But if you haven't oversimplified or kind of ridiculed their point, then you have at least bridged a gap. And I thought that was so good because that's what we're missing, is that you don't have to agree. But you want to come away with the gap bridged just a little in some way, and that just doesn't happen very much today.
It doesn't. And unfortunately, we think of conversations when they get to this point, and if they do get contentious or confrontational, it's easy to think of it as a win-lose conversation. But I think you just have to remember, no matter if you feel like you win, you've lost because you've lost that person. And so to get into that type of conversation, almost having hit a pause button, this is getting out of hand. I feel like I just need to win, or you get in that competitive mindset again. But again, as soon as you feel like you've won, you've lost.
Right. Yeah. And another pitfall that he talks about is one that we often characterize men as falling into. But I do think that as moms, a lot of times we fall into this too. We really want to fix something too early in a discussion. So maybe our kids have come to us with a problem, and I can already see 5 sentences down the road where they're going. Let's get to the heart of the problem. Let's solve it. Or if I'm telling my husband a story and I might take longer than he thinks that I should, he might throw out some solutions before I perceive that he really has all the information to even be offering up a solution. So I think we've all experienced this kind of thing, but I think that it is something that shuts down conversations, and it's not a good listening tool, when we do this.
Yeah. And I like how he said that he used the example of men often want to fix things too early. Like, I do go to John to ask for how could I fix this, but he starts in too early, and he makes the point that when we're talking, that's how we're formulating what the problem is, and you can't solve it until you know exactly what the problem is. And sometimes you may talk, and just by listening to yourself, this is what happens to me a lot. I often solve my own problem.
Right.
But so he said, then once you've formulated the problem, you can solve whatever problem is left. And sometimes there's not even one left. But if they've jumped in early, which we've called and asked them to do many times, we are asking, but they just do it a little too early, I think.
I know. The picture I get in my mind is that, you're going on a big trip. Well, I think that's your big problem you're trying to solve. And we've talked about this, that trying to enjoy the journey to get to the destination. And a lot of times that conversation is when you go to your spouse, that's the person that you're talking to, but you almost have to realize the journey is maybe more important than the destination. So to take time for the journey and it's hard, but I mean, the longer you're married, the easier it is for me to say, hey, I don't want to hear that yet. I just need to talk,
Right.
I know this routine.
I know he's more apt to say, "Oh, okay. Do you want me to answer right now?" He's asking me these questions. So should I say something? Like, where are you at in this process?
Right. Well, this reminds me. I was in the car with my oldest son this weekend, and we were on a drive. And so we put a podcast in, and he picked it. It was a advice podcast, and the guy that gives advice is a man, and he's wanted me to listen to this podcast before. And as we're talking right now, I just realized why I don't like that guy. I don't like him because he always jumps in on the caller too soon. We don't even know what the real problem is. And he's labeling the problem for her. She hasn't even really said what it is. He's offering solutions. And then he kind of, when she doesn't jump on that as the reason, he kind of backtracks and goes, okay, well, is that not the problem? And I'm like, if you would have just listened from the beginning, we don't even know what her problem is yet. Stop talking.
I think you just kept your mouth shut. You could have figured that out.
Maybe I like women advice givers better because maybe they listen longer.
That's why those write-in columns are so much easier, because the person taking the time to condense their problem into a text and sent it, mailed it, emailed it, whatever. So then you can give advice because the person's had a chance to list their whole problem and not be interrupted.
Right. So those are 4 different kind of pitfalls that we've all fallen into. We've all done these things, and we know people that have done them to us. I mean, it's just a human way of doing things. But if we wanted to be better about listening, what could we do differently? Julie, what should we do to listen better?
Well, according to Jordan Peterson, he mentions a technique that he likes to have people try, and it's where each person can only speak up for himself only after he's first restated the ideas and feelings of the previous speaker accurately and to that person's satisfaction. So in other words, when, like Marie, you say something, well, then I would summarize what you said and ask if I've understood you properly. And then you can accept it, or you can say, no, here's some clarification. This is what I meant. And so, he just thinks that that's the fairest way. And that when you have to restate it, you're probably going to distill it down and be even more clear. And that it's going to help you understand that person better. And they'll feel understood.
Yeah. Don't you do this sometimes with apologies? So if your kids are fighting, I never like to hear them just say, I'm sorry. Instead, I'm parroting the words they should have said, like, You need to say, I'm sorry for X, Y, and Z. I didn't realize I was doing X. I can see how you wanted X, because I'm trying to let the other person that hears the apology know that the person really understands what they did wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I will say, when I read that about the parroting each other back, I thought, man, that seems like it would make conversations so slow. Did you guys feel that way when you read it?
Well, I think that's the point.
Oh, bummer.
Unlike that guy on the radio or on the podcast.
Right.
What I hear you saying is,
Well, and like you said, Mindy, it helps to kind of distill it down. Like he said, sometimes when someone's talking through a problem they kind of don't understand, a lot of times they'll go down a lot of rabbit trails, and they'll say things that maybe are contradictory. And I know sometimes I'll do that. I'll say one thing, and then 5 minutes later, I might say something else, and the person will go, well, wait a minute, that isn't, you just said this. And it's not that you're lying or you're trying to be deceitful. It's, like, oh yeah, I don't really believe that. This is really more true over here. And so I think it helps the person get down to the gist of what their story is or their position is. So I think it's good kind of going back and forth, summarizing. I'm sure it feels awkward at first, but sounds like a good thing to try.
And sometimes our conversations might actually be shorter, because I might go on and on trying to explain my position 6 different ways, because I never really sense that the other person understands my position. Whereas if they would have just said what they thought I was saying, I could have moved on.
Right.
That is a good point, because I won't say who, but someone in our family likes to give lots of reasons over it, and he has said before, well, I didn't know you understood, because I don't give a lot of feedback. And so I think that's right. It could shorten the conversation.
I have had that problem, Julie. You talked about giving feedback. I'm the same way. Like people in my family will be talking, and I'm looking and I'm nodding and I'm looking at them. I'm thinking, and they keep repeating. I'm like, yeah, I heard you said that like 3 times. And then they're like, oh, I didn't know you heard me.
I know. I thought, well, I'm looking right at you and I'm nodding, and he wants me to say, I heard you, I agree, or that is a good point, or that, he wants that.
I understand.
Those words. And I just think, yes, I like, why? I'm nodding, I'm looking.
I know. I've heard it's like, okay, now you pass the ball back to to your person, and then they pass the ball to you, and it's your turn to speak. Oh, wait, it's my turn. Okay, I need to give feedback. Okay, here's the ball back.
Yes, that's very hard for me. It's awkward.
Right. Right.
What I hear you saying, Julie, is
conversations are hard.
Feedback is also hard.
Yes.
Julie and I have the being quiet thing down.
Well, and that's the thing, is I am processing it inside. Tomorrow afternoon, I would have a good response for you.
Right.
So yes, that is true. Like, it's funny that he just wants to hear those words, even though I thought all my body language was conveying that, but apparently he's not a good reader of that.
Apparently the body language is not conveying that we heard what they said.
Right. Yeah. And body language is so important in listening. If I am talking to somebody and they look at their watch or their phone, I don't even want to talk to them anymore. You know what I'm saying?
Does that happen in our
look
household?
at your watch.
It just shuts down all communication.
It does, Marie. It does.
Really, really bad.
Yeah, but I know I'm guilty of that. I mean, okay, this is the part that's hard, because I'm thinking about even when my kids were little and they would want to like tell me about a movie, and I would always say, you need to describe it in 3 sentences or less. I don't care what the movie is. I don't want to hear more than 3 sentences about it. Now, is that a terrible listener, or is that saving my sanity? I don't know.
It's both. You're helping them learn how to summarize. Okay. And also, it's very important to me, but I only want to hear 3 sentences.
Yeah. Like about your dreams and about movies. I don't want to hear more than 3 sentences.
Right.
Like dreams that you've had overnight. If you're talking about what your future, I want to hear more.
Oh, not their lifelong dreams.
Right. This is about like things that you dreamt while you're sleeping. But he does make the point that how other people react to your talking teaches you things. And so I do think that we teach our kids things subtly, like don't go on never ending sentences, never letting the other person get a word in edgewise. by our reactions, or we kind of show that, hey, that seems like a dangerous idea. Like we are teaching.
Right.
Yeah. When your eyebrows go up really high or
right.
your eyes bug out, you don't have to say anything. They kind of get the picture.
Yeah.
And that's why, communicating over text and email and social media is probably not the healthiest thing for people anymore. I think we're losing a lot of helpful aids in communication by just reading it.
Right.
It's true. I'll say something else I'm guilty of is, and Bryce has joked with this about me. It's a joke now, but it was kind of like to bring this to my attention. Like he's like, "Your mom and me again." And because as moms, we get used to multitasking, and especially if you have a lot of children, you're used to a lot of talkers all at the same time. And so when everyone was at home, I do remember vividly, our conversations were crazy. And we're like, okay, wait, no, he started first, let him talk. Okay, now it's your turn. Okay, now it's your turn. But even as the kids get older, you get used to multitasking and you're going, yeah, oh, wow. And then before you know it, you're momming, you're in the mom mode of to give cues verbally, but it's more like, yeah, but can you really tell me back what they just said? I don't know.
Saving your sanity.
Okay. Wait, that goes back to the very first quote that you read, Marie, that we thought was so harsh. It said, advice is what you get when the person you're talking with about something complicated wishes you would just shut up and go away. And we all thought that was so horrible.
That's so mean. Who would do that?
It's because we don't have little kids anymore. We've forgotten that is the only way to survive life. Like my younger son, he took a job as a after school counselor for elementary kids. And very soon, a few days into that job, he came home and he's like, now I understand. I'm just saying while 6 kids talk to me and I don't hear what any of them are saying. And it's true.
You're so overstimulated. You're like, I have no words.
Yeah. But the good thing is we do grow out of that. The bad thing though, Mindy, is like you said, we can start to do that habitually and think that we can pay attention to more people than we really can.
Right. But we can't.
Yeah. I'm thinking also of big family dinners. A lot of times I'm listening to conversation 2 people down while I'm also having the conversation with the person across the table from me. And I'm not really getting anything out of 2 different conversations.
Yeah, because as a mom, I want to be a part of it all. So I want to hear what they're talking about with each other. So I'd rather just listen and try to hear it all. But that's hard.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you guys, but my younger 2 boys they got used to just being left out. This sounds terrible. And so now, because they're 4 and 6 years younger than Abby and Grant. And so we have actively tried to engage them in our adult conversation because for so long they were the babies, then they were the toddlers, they were the little kids. And so, they're teenagers and they really should be a part of the conversation. And so giving them a voice and time and not the rest of us talking over them. So we've had to actively change that in our house.
Yeah. The worst listening habits come out within your own family.
Oh, yeah. Everybody talks over each other. And you're right. It's like the older kids think that's more important than what the younger one has to say. And
Yeah. One thing I wanted to share that I noticed about listening was how wonderful it is when you've actually moved out of those little kid conversations and you have genuine adult conversations with your adult kids. So I was talking to my older son this week about something I was confused about. It wasn't technology. It was more of a spiritual, moral type issue. Now, first of all, what a miracle it is that you ever get beyond the movie summary and you actually have real conversations at some point in your kids' development. But we were talking and I was just thinking about how he did know some things that I didn't know. I was asking what he genuinely thought, and I was listening, and what he said impacted how I thought about something. And I just thought, what a beautiful place to get to.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure you guys have experienced that too.
Yeah, it's a fun thing to have spiritual conversations with my daughter and to ask her, I actually ask her opinion, like, well, what do you think about this? And how would you respond? And even a relationship questions, I value her opinion, and that is a good place to come because you put in a lot of years of like you said, movie descriptions and drama and all that stuff. So it is a nice reward.
I do love that. I have to say those are some of the most rewarding conversations is, having adult children, being able to hear how they're doing things and that it's so different from how I have done them or how Bryce has done them. And that it's really awesome. Like they're doing well. And so those spiritual conversations are some of the most fun. And it was neat because over this last weekend, both of my big kids and Joey came home and we actually were sitting around and as a family, we were talking about evangelism, like of all things. It was really an amazing conversation. And to have Abby and Joey talk about their experiences with their college ministry and the things they'd learned outside of our home. And, Jacob and Nathan are picking up on this and they're having conversation about this. And it was just a really cool moment to have them essentially leading our family in things that they had learned about how to share their faith. I was just, those are like awesome moments and you just hang on to those.
And that is the conversational model that he kind of ends with, where he's like, the final type of conversation akin to listening is a form of mutual exploration. It requires true reciprocity on the part of those listening and speaking. It allows all participants to express and organize their thoughts. A conversation of mutual exploration has a topic, generally complex, of genuine interest to the participants, and everyone participating is trying to solve a problem instead of insisting on the validity of their own positions. And aren't those just the most beautiful conversations, whether they happen with your adult children or with a close group of friends, or even if you were talking with strangers about something, like those conversations are life-giving to us. We feel so good in something like that.
Yeah, there's another quote that I'd like to read. He said, a conversation like that puts you in the realm where souls connect, and that's a real place. It leaves you thinking, that was really worthwhile. We really got to know each other. The mask came off and the searchers were revealed.
Yeah. So that final type of conversation, the conversation of exploration, that is where we really do all want to get to. It's too bad we fall down with so many pitfalls along the way.
Yes, I do love that. But being open and being an explorer, I like thinking of it that way. Like you're going on an adventure when you talk to somebody. And if you're closed to the adventure and you're not willing to pack and leave, you're not going to learn anything or grow. And so I love being open and available while knowing what I believe.
Right.
And I really appreciate that he said that it takes courage, because I hadn't thought about that. That's really true. Courage to change your mind.
And courage to put yourself out there with your thoughts. Because I also think, and he didn't really talk about this, but being a good listener involves being a safe place. You have to be kind of non-judgmental. You have to not be looking for the conversation to end in the next 5 minutes. You have to be able to hear one thing and then a little while later, like you said, Julie, they might say something else and not just pounce on them for, their double-minded thinking. Like you have to be a safe place in order for someone to want to talk with you and to want to have you listen.
Right.
Yeah. And it takes a lot of work. That's not easy. And he said, most of us don't do this well.
Right.
So it's a lot to think about.
Think about all the preparation you'd have to go through to be ready for a really good conversation. That would take a lot of work. To set down all the things you're trying to do and all the things you're thinking about. And, like you really to be available for something like that, that's an event. Like you'd have to go into it knowing or preparing for it.
I mean, it's really sort of like our podcast, because our podcast, we try to design it to have a good conversation. So we allow time for each person to speak. A lot of times we will kind of echo back what someone says. But it's hard. Like, we have to have things written down. Like, we have to have an outline to even have a conversation of mutual exploration sometimes.
Right.
So it's not easy. And that's why this chapter and this rule is so valuable as a reminder to us to think about what the other person might have to teach us.
Right. Such a good conversation.
Yeah. Well, listeners, we hope that this kind of talk about Jordan Peterson's book and the chapter on listening helped you. If you haven't read his book, it is weighty, but it is worth reading. And hopefully we'll have some other chapters that we might go through in the future. I really enjoy delving into these rules for life because they seem like they would be pretty obvious, but they're actually kind of hard to put into practice. And if you have any thoughts on this, you can contact us at Midlife Matters Podcast on Instagram, or you can email us at midlifematterspodcast@gmail.com. But now it's time to go on to I'm a Fan. All right, Julie, what are you a fan of this week?
All right. I'm a fan of a food product that I had last weekend, and it was the Organic Simple Truths brand, which I think is Kroger's brand. It's their oatmeal chocolate chip cookie dough, and it comes in a pack. So I think there's, 12 or 24 little already, they're already in little dough balls that you just set out on the pan and cook. But they tasted like homemade. Like, you could take a plate of these to your neighbor and you would think they were homemade cookies.
Oh, perfect.
These are ready to bake, preservative free, organic, non-GMO, and it makes 12 cookies. There's real oats and chocolate chips, and they're just perfect. Really do taste like homemade. No one would ever know.
That sounds delicious.
That would be good if your kid comes to you and says the night before, hey, I'm supposed to bring something to this event.
That's actually my favorite flavor cookie, too.
Yeah, I love the oatmeal in there.
All right, Mindy, what are you a fan of this week?
All right. Well, in honor of our conversation today, going on long walks with a friend is one of the best ways that I try to have good conversation and work out the things in my life while being a good friend. I had a friend that just recently told me about these socks, and I have tried them out the past couple of weeks, and I'm tough on socks with working out, with long walks, and these are awesome. And so the brand is Darn Tough, and these are guaranteed for life. Wow. So they are made in Vermont. It's merino wool. I don't know if that's how you pronounced how they're made, but basically they are supposed to be good socks for life. So like I bought a pair on Amazon for about $16.
Okay.
And so they're odor resistant, moisture wicking, thermal regulating, and all day comfort. That's the taglines. But they have different styles. I bought the running socks, so they're like the no-show socks, and they haven't ridden down.
Oh, that's good.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
That's like the main. I'm like, if I'm walking for 8 miles, I really need to have good socks on. I don't want to be fighting with them. But they make socks for hiking. And so really any activity you can get on and kind of see what they do. But I have been very, very pleased with these socks.
Oh, and I know that you're kind of a picky sock person because you had a sock recommendation, another podcast, and you said you actually washed your socks by hand because you're picky.
I love my socks.
Yeah.
Yes. And I still like my features socks. But it took me a lot to try these, but I listened for long enough to my friend who was talking about how good they were.
Did you try to one-up her, Mindy, and tell her about your feature socks?
I mean, I told her about my features, but she totally won the conversation with the Darn Tough.
So what you're saying, Mindy, is the Darn Tough socks are the best.
I don't know if I'm willing to say they're the best, but I definitely am gravitating towards them more than my features. And I think what will make me love them more is if they do not fall apart, or get peely, like in the heel after so many miles, because that has happened with my features.
Yeah.
So the jury's still out.
Yeah. All right. Well, that sounds good. I'm a fan this week of something also for your foot. Have you heard of Archie's flip-flops?
No.
I hadn't heard of them, but my sister wore them to the pool and they looked cute on her. So I asked her about them and then I ordered a pair. So they have real arch support. They guarantee no breaks or blowouts. When the flip-flop breaks at an inopportune time.
Yes.
It says they have a tight strap, which means no toe grabbing. They're light as a feather. They really are light. And they're made of a specialized foam material that molds to your feet. And you can actually stretch the strap if it's like a little bit too tight for you. They really get more comfortable the more you wear them. So I probably got them maybe 6 weeks ago, and my sister said, "Do you like them?" And I said, I mean, they're okay. But actually, the longer I've worn them, the more I like them. So now I'm using them for an I'm a fan, just because I think they do need to be broken in a little bit.
Where'd you get them?
We actually ordered them off the Archie's website.
Okay.
But I don't know if they have them on Amazon.
And how much do they run, Marie?
I think they were about $30 maybe, but it says free shipping on orders of 2 or more pairs. They were $25 to $30, I think.
Okay.
But yeah, I think they're good, especially if you're going to wear them around a lot of water.
Right.
Anyways,
fun.
Hard to believe we're almost out of flip-flop season, but if you need a pair, these would be good ones to try. When we're recording this, yesterday was Labor Day, so we are almost to my favorite time of year. I know Julie likes fall. Mindy, you're not quite on board.
I'm hanging on to summer. I feel like I've been frozen for a couple of years and I'm still thawing out over here.
Yeah.
But every time I think of the winter, I do get excited because it's going to be so mild compared to what I'm used to.
You'll still be able to wear your Archie's flip-flops the whole year.
Yeah.
I will be wearing those flip-flops all year. I'll be like 40 degrees. I got my flip-flops on.
Yeah.
Yeah, my Birkenstocks, Julie.
All right. Well, I appreciate the way you guys listen to me every week. And I look forward to some more listening next week.
Appreciate our listeners.
Yes.
Love it.
Listeners,
Yes.
thank you so much for listening, because none of you ever fall into the pitfalls because you don't get to say anything.
I know.
They're perfect.
This is easy. We just talk at you and you don't have an opportunity to respond, but we really do want you to respond.
Yeah.
Right. So reach out. You could even call us on our phone number if you really want to use words.
Yes.
209 Midlife. But if you don't want to use words, you could email us or find us on Instagram. All right, Julie and Mindy, I'll talk to you next week.
Sounds great.
Bye. We're so happy you joined us today. You can find the show notes for this episode at midlifematterspodcast.com. Also, please tell a friend about the show and help them hit the free subscribe button on their favorite podcast app. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Midlife Matters Podcast. That's where we post pictures and stories about all the things we talk about in each episode. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.